Welcome to the discussion today. My guests are Brad Stone, a vice president at Booz Allen Hamilton, and Stan Lowe, an executive advisor at Booz Allen Hamilton. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Before we get started, let me set a little context for our discussion. I'm going to pull some of that context from an earlier panel we had with Booz Allen Hamilton, but as well as representatives from the FBI, from the Homeland Security Department, and General Motors from the private sector, where we talked about, with Brad Mederi, the colleague of yours from Booz Allen, cybersecurity and some of the threats that agencies and organizations are facing. Now, one big takeaway from that discussion is the need for agency organizations and others to really have great leadership around cybersecurity. And to understand that cybersecurity, there's challenges and solutions, and it's got to come from that leadership. They have to own it. And then the other piece that I'd like to point out for this first part of our discussion is the idea of the need to quantify, but also manage the risk in a more holistic way. It's not just a risk of one program or one system, but across the entire organization. But no matter how much risk you can recognize and mitigate, how much leadership there is from the top to the bottom, we know also from that panel discussion, the weakest link remains the people. This is what hackers are taking the most advantage of. So let's start the discussion here. We have people, we have technology that's more connected than ever. We have vulnerabilities, complex, distributed, uncertain challenges are coming ahead. Cyber attacks, we know, are getting more sophisticated, and agencies and organizations are having a harder time defending that. So let's start at the beginning. I'm going to turn to Stan to start, since you have that government background, FTC, the VA, other agencies. Why is the cybersecurity problem still such a problem? It sounds like maybe a no-duh question.
Yeah, well, the government has been, I shouldn't say we anymore, but the government has been trying to solve this problem for a number of years. And it's really, we've gotten to the point to where, with FISMA, the government is really compliance-based focused with cybersecurity. And we're getting to the point now to where the government is now recognizing that's something that is required, but it's not really getting us where we need to be. So the government is now looking to move to a risk-based model and be more focused on mission delivery and delivering goods and services that the government has to deliver in a secure manner as possible based upon the risk to the agency. So I think at this point, we're at a tipping point in the government where we're starting to recognize that compliance is something that has to happen, but it hasn't gotten us where we need to go. So now we need to focus more on risk-based cybersecurity activities that are more mission-focused.
Brad, let me turn to you. You bring both the government side, but also the commercial side. Are you seeing very similar where maybe the commercial sector or private sector was a little more compliance-based, but they moved a little more quickly to this less compliance issue?
Yeah, I think the commercial market, because of the closer ties to their lines of business and just the financial gains, in particular in the financial services area, has quickly moved past that compliance view of things, where it's kind of looking at the basics, what's connected, what are my vulnerabilities, what's my risk, and really moved it with that leadership on that bottom line view of what is actually the operational readiness. What are my risks? What are my crown jewels in building their cybersecurity strategies and posture to make sure that those top level risks, those operational risks or top business risks are the focus of their programs.
Now, it's interesting to say that the commercial sector's moved off compliance, and then we can point out the 101 different commercial sector problem cyber attacks that's happened. So why is it still a problem for them? If they have the money, they have the motivation, they have hopefully the top-down leadership, is it just not happening fast enough, or is it just where we're at in the cyber world?
Well, the threat landscape is changing every day. So our adversaries are at machine speed, and we're trying to keep up with them at machine speed. In addition, their enterprises are growing. Over the past 10 years, we've talked about a mobile workforce, and just as we're getting past that, now we're looking at the influx of industrial cyber challenges. What are we going to do with IoT and industrial control systems? So the job of your CISOs in the commercial market and in the government market is changing quickly. And so since that threat landscape and their attack surface is changing, they're constantly playing that fight. And the key is the idea of the machine speed within that. And that's where both our government and our commercial clients are really challenged to keep up with the machine speed of the cyber challenges.
Stan?
Sure. So, and that brings us to an interesting topic is a lot of the security organizations, especially on the operations side, look at screen. They have people in security operations centers looking at screens, and there's just massive amounts of data that is coming in. So the move to orchestration and automation is going to be a critical component for the agencies and the commercial sector to be able to absorb and make sense of the amount of data that's coming into them, because right now we're looking for a needle in a stack of needles, and the bad guys are really depending upon our inability to be able to actually determine or see them as they're moving through the networks.
And this idea of automation, orchestration, I think we're going to get into this later on as maybe some of the solutions to this problem. But is that something that is being adopted in the commercial world just as quickly? I mean, I think part of the challenge here, as Stan pointed out, is the data deluge that people just can't keep up with.
Yeah, in the commercial market, they're moving quicker to the idea of simplifying that process for their staff. The government, our clients, tend to be a little bit more focused still on glass watching. And the idea of I'll set up an SOP in response to a threat vector or a change. Well, the commercial clients are wanting to move beyond that, and that proactive defense of proactively hunting the network, taking their resources and really maximizing the impact of them, not just on that compliance and basic. And so since they're able to more closely tie that to their mission or operational, for them, it's the business, it's their brand. They have that quick tie-in for a mission imperative of it. That's where I think the government clients are a little bit more challenged of tying the cyber problem, the IT problem, to what their function that Stan talked about earlier. Because at the end of the day, the business of the government is to provide services to us as people. And so that tying tends to make it a little bit more of an indirect relationship, where commercial clients, it's so much more direct.
Stan?
Right, yeah. The intangibility of most government CISOs to be able to show quantifiably what they're doing for their organizations and being able to help the mission of the agency that they're working for is going to be one of the key success factors going forward as the CISO role changes, because now they're not just, oh, the security guy that helps me do, block viruses and, control how people go to the web and what websites they can go to. They're actually starting to become members of the senior management of the agency, the senior management team of the agencies, to actually help those individuals, individual agencies complete their mission in a secure manner, which again brings us back to, instead of being compliance, being risk-based. Managing the risk of the agency from a cybersecurity perspective, Vice trying to figure out how you manage the risk using compliance, which is so far, we've been doing this for 25 years and hadn't exactly worked yet. So now's the really good time to start thinking about this differently.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on Stan's point, I think one of the differences that we see is that our commercial clients are willing to fail faster. In this day of having all this data and an overload of it, you can have a tendency in the government to kind of get locked in. You get vendor lock-in, you get data lock-in, you get staff trained in a certain way, and the ability and the agility to retrain that workforce or to change out from one, let's say, SIM product to another. And in a government organization, it's slow, and it has a huge commitment. Right. A commercial organization can make those changes, and that comes back again to that idea of machine speed. The agility of your organization and as a leader to be able to respond to that is critical. And that's, again, an area where I think our government folks can take some lessons learned from some of the commercial folks, that agility and ability to fail fast.
Stan, I want to go back to something you said about the changing role of the Chief Information Security Officer, the CISO. We know in September they finally named the federal CISO, something in the news business we've been waiting for some time. And yes, this person's going to be a lot about policy, and it's going to be a lot around really getting, herding cats, if you will. But do you get a sense that that's the raising of that CISO role because this administration said, hey, we need a federal CISO?
I think you're almost dead on with that. That I have been for a number of years, as you know, an advocate for having a federal CISO, just like we have a federal Chief Information Officer. And that role for the executive branch is going to be critical going forward. The agencies are going to look to the federal CISO to set the direction on how they interact with not only their agency leaders but their oversight bodies, both in Congress and in their IGs, on how they interact with those, and changing from that posture from being compliance-based to being risk-based, operational focused. And I think that it's critical to have a federal Chief Information Security Officer that can assist in that role and work with the Hill as well as the IG community to help that happen.
Now, Brad, let me turn to you just to talk about the CISO role a little bit. we've heard from Stan in terms of how the federal system is raising the look of that position. Are you seeing something similar in the commercial world? Are commercial company chief information security officers reporting directly to the vice president, the senior vice president, or even the CEO?
Yeah, lots of different organizations are taking different approaches. In some cases, it's very similar, where the CISO reporting up to a CIO, and often that creates a lot of confusion organizationally on who's operating, who's buying. What you're actually seeing in commercial is this move towards a chief security officer that reports directly to a CEO. So not just security on the information systems we're talking about, but security across the entire enterprise. As we think of the threat landscape mentioning earlier, this view of industrial or operational technology, a CISO is a security officer across all of it. It's not just your IT systems where you're having vulnerabilities. And it comes back to that human problem, right? The human problem is across the entire enterprise. So we're seeing a much quicker move in the commercial industry towards chief security officers that almost embrace the CISO role, that those folks are reporting directly to a CEO and a peer with a CIO.
And it seems, Stan, that it would have made sense for the government to move in that direction years ago with HSPD 12, the smart identity card, because that brought together the logical and physical access. But what we see time and again is there is that separation. You still have that IT guy and the physical guy,
right?
Or girl.
Yeah, that's true too. So you're right, and I agree to a certain extent with one of my first jobs when I came back into the government in the early 2000s. My agency had decided that, hey, cybersecurity and physical security and personnel security, there's no difference in between those things. You own security, which at the time I thought was interesting, and it was something that nobody had done before, and I didn't know anything about those other two areas, and I quickly had to learn. However, as I progressed in my career and went to different agencies, that mindset sort of fell away, and it was a complete concentration on the information side of it. However, in this day and age, we're starting to see that collapse back to that area where there is a chief security officer that is responsible for both the physical and the information security of both the organizations and the agencies. I don't think we've seen that in any of the federal agencies yet, but I think it quite possibly in the coming years and the next administration, we'll see what happens. But I think we'll start seeing something like that.
Brad, from your experience, because you've spent obviously cover the commercial world, you look at the public sector world. Do you see things happen? If you will, there's always the joke that fashion comes from the West Coast to the East Coast or something like that. I always make the joke that acquisition starts at DoD and moves down to the civilians. Do you see that security issue changing, moving from commercial to the private to the public sector?
Well, I definitely think the government is starting to buy more like our commercial colleagues are. I think in some cases that innovation, though, it just isn't stuck from a contracting perspective in commercial. Federal clients with what's going on with the CDM program and others are doing things in a different way and buying at scale and buying with the agility that the commercial clients are. So I think it's kind of a two-way street. I don't think anybody's got the problem completely solved from an acquisition. So it's not just, hey, government looking to commercial. Commercial still looking to government. And in particular, commercial still looking back to government on scale of the enterprise, the level of the challenge. And so there's still a lot of talk back and forth in both areas. Both are interested in what's the best practice as I scale in a different way. And on the other side, how can I have that agility in both directions? So I don't think there's one side that's leading the other. They're both watching each other at the same time saying, hey, you take a risk here, I'll take a risk here, and quickly sharing that information.
All right, that's a good place to stop, because when we come back, after our break, we're going to talk about some solutions to the problems. I know Stan brought up maybe a couple of solutions. You're listening to the panel discussion, Investing in Cybersecurity, Making the Case, sponsored by Booz Allen Hamilton on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.